Welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. If you're watching on YouTube, please can I ask you to consider subscribing to my channel, and if you click that notification bell you will be notified when I post new videos. If you visit my website, you'll find all these videos can be downloaded to your desktop in full HD. PTE AV Studio gives us a number of great options with text, but so do our image editors like Photoshop and Photoshop Elements, plus many others too. We could say that the text options via an image editor may give us just a little bit more creative scope, but the text within PTE AV Studio is far more convenient and very flexible. Especially in projects where we require many pages of text. A live talk perhaps, a little bit like a PowerPoint presentation, maybe just a wee bit better. Then it's a huge advantage to have constantly live text that we can edit within PTE AV Studio at any time. Text is created in the Objects and Animation screen of PTE AV Studio, and it will always remain independent to the background we're placing it upon. We would call this a text layer. Let me select this thumbnail, and we're going to open this one up and apply a title in the Objects and Animation screen. We can select the text tool from the menu here, but what we don't want is the text linked to the image we can see here. That's called parent and child. If we do this and then zoom the background image a bit later on, the text will zoom as well. Now that may be something we don't want to do. So to prevent that, if we click into the box at the bottom right, the bounding box you can see around the outer edge of the image will be turned off. Now what we've effectively done here is to deselect the image so that our text layer remains independent to it. So we can now go to the top left of the screen and select the text tool. When we do that, the word text will appear in the center of the screen within its own bounding box. But we don't adjust the text on screen. We do that over on the right hand side in the text box over here. So what I'm going to do is just highlight that text for a moment, and I'll type what would be the name of my slideshow. Now when I selected the text tool, we were automatically brought to the properties section, and that's why this box opened up. What I could do is go down to the bottom right corner, click into the box to remove the selection now from the text, and I could create as many text layers as I want or need. To go back to a selection, we just select the text or the image from the bottom right. So let's go back to our text and take a look at some of the options. Now one of those options, which is not entirely relevant when we've only got one image and one layer of text, but if I select my text or my image, I can go to the top of the properties section and I can rename the text. Now as I said, this is not entirely necessary here, but you can imagine if you did have several layers of text in this box, then this makes it very easy to identify each one. So let's take a look at one or two of the text options, starting just to the top left corner of the text box on the right. We can select bold, italics, and or underline. To turn them on, we click them once. To turn them off, we click them again. I think that's pretty well the same in many of the text editors or word processors that we're using. We also get the opportunity to change the font. Now when I drop this little window down, there's rather a large number of fonts there, but of course if I knew the one I wanted, which it's quite possible I do, I could go down and I could just select it. But there's a little tip here which I use quite a bit. If I just highlight the top there and I just move to my cursor control keys on the keyboard, once I've got the top font style highlighted, I can use the down arrow to scroll down all of the options I have, and when I find one which I think is suitable for my needs, then all I've got to do is to select that, and I can quickly find the font style I like. Now the next option we're likely to want to change is the font color, and we can do that from the white area just below the font style. If we click that, we have a number of styles here. It's an individual choice which way you want to select your color. I use this way sometimes, but quite often I use the eyedropper tool from the bottom left of this panel, and you'll find that in all three styles. If you're using a mouse, if you left click onto the eyedropper, you can drag onto the picture and you can select a color from within the image. Now that works particularly well because, generally speaking, we're selecting a color that's nicely in harmony with the image it's sitting on top of. If I'm happy with the color, I can click OK, but I know I can come back in and make changes to the color at any time. The next option just below the text box is alignment. But this is going to do nothing for the text we have because our text is just on one line. We need multiple lines to see the effect of this. So let me put my cursor at the end of the word sunrise and hit the enter key, and we'll type another line of text. Now when I select the alignment here, you can see exactly what the left does. It aligns the text down the left and of course down the right, and the default, as we saw, was center. While we've got two lines of text, we may as well look at line spacing, because this closes the gap between the two lines of the text I have here, or makes them wider, whatever we want to do. I'm going to put my cursor into that box and I'm going to use my up arrow, and if I just press and hold my up arrow, you can see it's just separating the two, and if I hit the down arrow, you can see it's closing the gap. So if we wanted two lines of text but we wanted to tighten them up and get them quite close together, there you can see we can do that using line spacing. But of course the default was 0, which I can easily reset, and I'd like to get rid of that in Tasmania, so I'll delete that, and we'll take a look next at the text shadow, which you'll notice if you look down below is ticked by default. So we can turn the shadow on and off from this little box here, and to the right, as you can see, we can customize it too. Now these options are pretty much what we're going to see in most software that creates shadows, and all the settings are going to be personal to you. I generally like to reduce the distance to about 10 and the size to about 10, and I quite often increase the opacity a little bit. Now I think many of us are going to have our favourite settings here, so it's good to be able to save those settings as a preset. Once I've got my adjustments made here, I can go to the drop shadow templates and choose to save the current shadow as a template. And I can give it any name I like, and I'll call it Barry's because it's probably going to be the only one in there, and OK. When I click OK, anytime I come back in to adjust the text shadow, when I go into the customize box and to the drop down menu, now I can see my own settings. There's quite a number of ways we can move, zoom or rotate our text. Probably the simplest method is click and drag. If I click within the bounding box, I can move my text. If I go to one of the corner toggles, it doesn't matter which one, I can increase the size or decrease it. And if I go just outside, you'll see a little curved linked arrow which enables me to rotate my text as well. If I take you over to the right hand side and we go back into the animation tab, I'm going to demonstrate how we can reset any of the values that I've just put into my text. If I double click the X, you can see it goes back to the center. Double click the Y, I'll double click the rotate. With the zoom, generally speaking, the zoom will always come up around 15%. So if I double click this, it jumps to 100. But that's no great problem because we can just overtype the value and put 15 in there. But the other way we can move text is by clicking and dragging over the X, pan X and pan Y, over the zoom X or Y, and the rotate options too. So we could click and drag to the right, click and drag to the left, and click and drag to the right, and it amounts to the same thing. There is another way we can move text. If we place our cursor into any of these value boxes, then we can use those cursor control keys on our keyboard to nudge the text up, down, left, right, bigger or smaller. Now sometimes that can be quite useful, especially if I just wanted to nudge it down just a little bit. It's often more convenient to do it that way. Now let's consider what will happen with the opening title we've just created. The word sunrise is going to appear on screen at the same time as the image, and it's going to stay visible for the entire time the image is on screen. Let me show you just a quick demo of that. Now that wasn't bad at all, but we may want something different. Let's change things a little so that when the image appears we get a short time to view that image before the text appears. Then the text can fade away, leaving us with the image for a few more seconds. Now to be able to do that, we're going to require a slide duration of around 16 seconds. So let's place 16 seconds in the box here, and then we can open this image up in the Objects and Animation screen. So making sure we take a quick look over to the bottom right corner to make sure it is the text that we have selected. Over on the left down the bottom in the timeline we can see the first of our keyframes. So I'm going to move that keyframe with click and drag. That grey bar is the 2 seconds fade of this image onto the screen. How long do we want this on screen before the text starts to appear? Let's say we want to give it 3 seconds. So 3 seconds plus the 2 fade on. This needs to be placed around about the 5-second point. Now it doesn't have to be pinpoint accurate, but for the sake of this exercise let me take you over to the right hand side to keyframe time, because what I can do here is just hit 500, 0, and we've got the first keyframe on that 5-second point. But of course at that point we want the text to be invisible. So if we go to the animation options on the right, we can reduce the 100 to 0. Now we need to think about how long we need for the text to appear on screen. I'm going to suggest probably no more than a second. So I'm going to go down to my keyframe, right click, and I'm going to add a keyframe. There it is, and I'm going to position that 1 second further on. So if I put 6 seconds in there, but at that point I want my text to be fully visible. So now I need my opacity, and I need that back to 100. So from that keyframe we're seeing nothing. From 5 to 6 seconds we're seeing the text. How long do we want the text on screen? I'm going to suggest 4 seconds. So the next keyframe needs to go 6 plus 4 at the 10-second point. We can place our cursor and we could right click and add a keyframe and it'll drop onto the cursor. There's a number of different ways we can work, and as I've said, it's not crucial that we put this right on the 10-second point, but it's a bit clearer, I think, for a demonstration. So between this keyframe, when sunrise appears, to this keyframe, we really don't want anything happening at all, but we do want the opacity to remain at 100%. But now, of course, we probably want to fade the text away, and we would probably choose another second to do that. So we can right click, add another keyframe. I'll position that accurately, and I'll go to my opacity and say I want that to be invisible I should say. So if you look at what we have there, 2-second fade on, 3 seconds to enjoy the image, a second for the text to appear, 4 seconds to enjoy the title, 1 second fade off, and then a few more seconds to enjoy the picture before we move on to the next one. Now let me give you a demonstration of that. Now you would have noticed that I made a couple of small changes with that last demonstration. I removed the drop shadow of the word sunrise because I felt it looked better without it. But then I needed to darken the text color just a little bit to make it stand out nicely. Now we often have a problem making our text stand out from the background, and there's a great way to deal with that in PTE AV Studio: dynamic blur. There are times when our text or title can clash with the image beneath, especially if that image is just a little bit fussy in content. Now, one thing we can do to improve matters is to add dynamic blur, but to add that to the image, of course. But we can synchronize the blur to match our title. Now, as you can see, I've added another image to the file list, which is a little bit more fussy than the one we used originally. Let's show you how we can swap that image with the one down at the bottom here without making any changes to any of the settings, to the transitions, to the slide duration, or any animation if we had any. So with this image selected, let's open up the Objects and Animation screen. So to swap this image and leave all of the settings as they are, which is very convenient, we need to go to that box on the bottom right and select the image in question. We need to open up the Properties tab, and we need to go to the Picture option here, and we need to browse for the picture we want. You may have to navigate to where you're working the first time, but it's gone exactly to where my images are stored, so I'm going to double click the image I want and it's instantly replaced. But if I move my cursor from left to right, you can see that the text remains in position. Now, of course, I could change the color of my text, so just for the moment let me go to my sunrise text. I'm going to select one of the keyframes where I can see the text. In fact, in one of the demos I showed you earlier on, I actually removed the text shadow, so I think I'll do that again. But I'm going to choose a different color, so I'm going to click the color square, going to use my eyedropper tool and pick something which is more in keeping with this. I'm going to make it nice and dark, something like that, but I'm going to leave it in that position. So now we've got to make some changes to the image, but we can use the keyframes we currently have, particularly their positions, by selecting both the sunrise from the box on the bottom right and holding the control key, selecting the image too. Now we can see the keyframes down in the timeline below of both the text and the image. So I can quickly and easily line these up, because if I drag this one, it'll snap to that one, which is where I want it. Then I'm going to add 3 more. I'm going to use the insert key this time, so I'm going to touch the insert key once, twice, 3 times. And I'm going to move each of these keyframes to correspond with the text, and then we'll make our changes. So just a quick recap from this keyframe to this keyframe. The text is going to appear. So from this keyframe to this keyframe, we need our background image to go slightly blurred. To do that, we need to go back to our animation tab. We need to turn on the blur options, and we need to click and drag to the right to add the amount of blur we want. I don't want to go too far. Look at that, 12. It's making that text stand out rather nicely, so I could just leave it at 12. If I move to the next one, I can tick the box once again and just overtype the same value, because we want it to remain the same between those 2 points. But between this keyframe and this keyframe, then we want our blur completely off, and we can always do that if we had a blur in there by double clicking the R. So I suppose this would be another good time to do one of those short demos. PTE AV Studio has a number of slide styles built into the software which are based on text. I'm sure you've already discovered them, but just in case you haven't, they are worth looking at, and they're worth applying and opening up into the objects and animation screen to see how they were created. Let me select the second image, the one that doesn't have any text on that at all. I'm going to go to my Styles and Themes button, and to the Styles tab, and to the Caption option. The top 2 show that we don't need any images at all. We can apply the top 2 to the blanks you can see at the start and the end of my little demo below. But if I wanted to add any one of these captions, and there you can see one, I can add it to this image because that's the one I've selected. We get the opportunity over here to type in the caption or the text we want. We get the opportunity to adjust image size, but more importantly probably the size of the font. So if I put my cursor in that box and I use my up arrow, you can see how I can increase the size of the title. But everything else, the animation, is a part of the slide style. So all I need to do here is just apply that, and we have it over the top of this image. I'll take you into the objects and animation screen so we can look at this in isolation. It's varied things a little bit, but we can put the cursor up at the left hand end, we can press play, and we can see exactly what the slide style does. And of course we can change the color, and we can also change the font style. Sometimes we can learn quite a bit from just applying a slide style and taking a look in the objects and animation screen to see how they were created. So there we have the basics of text in PTE AV Studio. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'll see you next time.